So this is the latest film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Previously, we had Madam Web, which was its own disaster, and just when we thought comic book movies couldn't get anywhere, so Sony comes and outdoes themselves. Kraven the Hunter stars Aaron Taylor Johnson as Sergei Kravinoff slash Kraven slash the Hunter slash Kraven the Hunter. The film opens with him infiltrating this high security Russian prison, executing an arms dealer of some sort, escaping mysteriously. And then we find out he's got a list. He's checking it twice, looking for bad guys to knock off. And then we actually jump back to his childhood, where we get the whole entire first act is like backstory, and it's all the young versions of the kids. But he's involved in a hunting accident on safari in Africa, nearly killed by a lion, gets these powers of the beast where he has super strength and can run and jump and all those things. And then we finally jump back, and there's just a ton going on. He's chasing down bad guys are chasing down him. He's trying to save his brother. People are trying to kidnap his brother. Russell Crowe is their father, who's kind of doing both. He's also a bad guy in this underworld. Alessandro Nivola is in it as the Rhino, fitting in. There's a ton going on. It's a little too long. This is also directed by J.C. Chandor, which I love his movie, A Most Violent Year from 2014. We also reviewed his Triple Frontier, which was on Netflix about 5 years ago. I'm sorry to see him come down to this, but a lot to talk about. Zach, what did you think of Kraven the Hunter?
I really appreciate your sympathy for director J.C. Chandor. You're like, I'm so sorry. He's fallen from grace to Kraven the Hunter. It's terrible. The movie's terrible. Kraven the Hunter's terrible. It's terrible for a number of reasons. Like, structurally, it doesn't work. The characters are paper thin. The origin story is no fun. The violence is like overwrought and mostly like CGI blood, and most of the F bombs are put in post. Like, it's like they forced it to be rated R. Like, somebody thought maybe it'll do better. Like, it's just such a train wreck from start to finish. And like it doesn't even have like the charm of the Madam Web cast. Like, at least Dakota Johnson was like funny. Like, at least she seemed to kind of get the assignment. And at least like Goofy Sydney Sweeney is uniquely charming for what she's doing in that movie. But like, here you don't get any of that. Like, Aaron Taylor Johnson is bad. Russell Crowe is hilariously bad. It's just bad all around. Like, Kraven the Hunter is such a train wreck.
Crowe's doing a good accent. Let's start with
Crowe's
performances.
so funny in this movie.
Russell Crowe has reached that stage in his career where he's like, I'm going to sit behind a desk for everything, and you're going to pay me a bunch of money. He's the patriarch of this family, very tough on Sergei. Calls his other son, I can't remember the other one. Dimitri. He calls him weak and all these things, and he's also an arms dealer of some sort. His Russian accent is probably the best. It's the most consistent. The sons do not have Russian accents, and Aaron Taylor Johnson, who is British, his American accent's kind of all over the place. It kind of slips in and out. It's kind of funny. Oscar winner Ariana DeBose is in this. She won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress in Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. Incredible role. And she's kind of been relegated to these terrible movies. She needs a new agent because she's a huge talent. But not in this. It's bad. Alessandro Nivola, I think, is doing the best as the Rhino character. And a wild Christopher Abbott appearing late in the movie, which I saw this post that says, if Christopher Abbott shows up in your movie late, it's a bad for everyone.
Yeah, it's over. Oh, dude. Okay, so I completely forgot anybody of like real stature was in this movie, which is why it was so funny when like Russell Crowe shows up. Because you're right, he's sitting in most of his scenes, and when he's not sitting, he's drinking. And every time his character's drinking, I was like, "That's probably real booze." Like, I'll bet that's real hooch in that glass. Like, he's just doing it right there on set.
Method acting.
It's so funny because we just covered Gladiator 2, and Gladiator 2 has this huge Russell Crowe shaped hole in it. Like, the lack of Marcus Aurelius is a huge part of that movie. And you feel that like lack of magic from his performance. Like, Paul Mescal does his best to bring it. And then just a couple weeks later, you like slump down to the dark corner of the movie Cineplex, and you see Kraven the Hunter like running on a small screen, and there he is. there's Russell Crowe, alongside Alessandro Nivola, who's way too good for this movie and is doing some of the best acting in it. Yeah, really goofy and funny and odd, and like he seems to kind of understand the assignment. And then of course the late Christopher, well, sorry, I said the late Christopher Abbott. Christopher Abbott showing up late is really funny and feels a lot like you're watching Poor Things, and I can't recall what other films he's done that in, but it's always a good time when he shows up. Way too many villains, which is funny because our lead is supposed to be a villain, and maybe that's part of the point, that he's a good guy in a world full of villains, a la like Venom, and his Morbius kind of does the same thing. It is funny that Kraven the Hunter is afraid of spiders, but seemingly nothing else, much less his father, which is where like the family dynamic kind of comes from in this movie. You're right. Like Russell Crowe is kind of this like Russian drug dealer hunter guy, and he's like teaching his sons to hunt. And then one of them gets brutally attacked by a CGI lion and becomes Kraven the Hunter, which nobody else can figure out, even though their last name is Kravinoff. It's really funny. Like I figured for sure somebody would at least. I thought somebody would acknowledge that. Like at least once, one of them would go Kravinoff. I can't believe we didn't put that together. Like never in the script do they ever actually point at the gag. It's really funny, but it's horribly boring. Nothing happens in this movie, and when it does happen, it's horrible CGI, which is funny because they spent a lot of money on it. You just don't see any of that here. Like it's real odd. And I don't know if they like stumbled into this through reshoots or like it's just an amalgamation of bad on top of worse. Like what happened in production to get this movie like this?
Its biggest sin is being boring. It's supposed to be an action comic book movie, and somehow it's 2 hours long. If this were 90 minutes, it would work. I think it would work even just as camp. It is so long, and there are so many scenes where you get some action, and then there's like 10 minutes of people talking in rooms, and then you'll get some action, and then another 10, 15 minutes of people talking in rooms. Like somehow it is so boring. The first act, after the opening scene, when we flash back and we get the origin story, we're with the young kids the entire first act. After that, like none of the stars are in really that first act except Russell Crowe. And I have this theory that they're trying to save money they're like, if we have a big cast and everyone only gets a little bit of screen time, we don't have to pay as much as if you had Russell Crowe like the entire time. So that's my theory, because not only are none of the stars in like that first third, including Aaron Taylor Johnson, but then throughout the rest of the movie, you're jumping between people, and you have a lot of the important people not on screen, and I think it's all for budgetary reasons.
Yeah, it's a whole lot of like high-rise office buildings with like fancy lights and like wood paneled walls, and like a cool paperweight on that glass desk that our characters are talking over for like most of the movie. And then of course we get like Alessandro Nivola's like server room hideout that kind of looks like it's in a cave but isn't. And like I said, you end up having a bit of fun with him, but Christopher Abbott kind of swings in as a protagonist or an antagonist that doesn't really get like I think his due. And there's kind of some larger works hinted at. There's a scientist in New York that some of our villains reference that is real great and can do anything for you. And Kraven's like, who is this scientist character? And makes you wonder that like maybe there was more to this. In fact, the movie kind of implies that there's more story to tell, which is weird because Sony seems to be putting a pause on all these, and as far as we know, is not going to be making any for the immediate future. But lofty. I don't think it had a post-credit sequence. I didn't stick around. I got out of there as fast as I could. Oh my god! I'd rather do anything than be in the theater for. Okay, well, good. I'm glad I didn't miss anything. I think Ariana DeBose is horribly wasted. Her character Calypso
doesn't show up till Act 2.
Yeah, and is a very complicated character who the movie does not give any real oxygen to. Like, she is like a mystic, lawyer, warrior, archer, friend of Kraven the Hunter. But
you'll find out in the sequel.
Yeah, like she's really should not be in this movie. Like most of us shouldn't, and mostly like Aaron Taylor Johnson. Dude, I don't know his accent. I could not play. Because he's British. You said this already. He's British, but he's supposed to be doing a Russian American. But it's a Russian,
but for some reason,
man who has an American accent.
They chose not to do Russian accents for the kids, so he's really just doing an American accent. But it's not consistent.
Dude, it's like it's ADR'd. Like it's real bad, and it's like it makes you wonder how a movie like this gets made because it wasn't cheap. wasn't cheap, and they did a lot of marketing for it. But then late in the game, Sony originally pulled it back from like the 4,000 theaters that Madam Web ran into like 3,000. Like they seem to know that like, okay, this is not a banger. We're gonna kind of quietly transition into whatever's next in Spider-Man movies, I guess. Is this the death knell of the Sony Universe films? Are we not getting another Morbius? Are we ever going to see the fabled team up of Madam Web and Kraven?
There's allegedly some sort of fourth Spider-Man movie in development, which is a Sony and Sony Marvel / Disney Marvel co-production. And I mean, that's the thing. They own the rights. They got to use Spider-Man. They got to get Spider-Man into these movies. They're just really taking too long. And I think one of the biggest crimes that this movie also commits is that it seems like it's a shame to be a comic book movie. You don't really get any of the comic book stuff, like the big fight between the Rhino and Kraven that you see in the trailers. It happens in like the last 10 minutes. And that stuff is pretty cool. That's like this. It's like, but we don't get any of that earlier in the movie. Like I'm like, where is all like the superhero stuff that I came to see? None of it is happening, and it's almost like it's a shame to be that kind of movie. And it was like, no, I wanted to be like a John Wick or just a generic action movie. It feels like it's really not like it's ashamed of its comic book origins.
Yeah, it's funny. Madam Web kind of pulls that same trick. Like in the marketing, they showed a lot of like Sydney Sweeney in this like spider outfit and like a couple of the other girls. And it turns out like that's not actually what's going on in that movie. And Kraven the Hunter pulls that same trick. Like he didn't really get his big dumbass vest till like late in the game. And you'd think like that's like the trademark vest, but it looks so awful on Johnson that they just like hide it and just put it like way late in the movie, and it's like he's it's like he's putting on the suit for the first time kind of thing. Also, I want to mention I feel bad for Aaron Taylor Johnson. Just in general, his physique is horrifically shredded in this movie. He looks like he's in physical pain.
Juice,
a couple points.
juice.
Like, dude, he's so
Guys, he's gotta be on the juice.
My man has not eaten sugar in 9 years. Like he cannot be well regulated. He's got to be going to therapy. Like. It just seems like a mess. It's like a movie made by a studio with no soul, no creative identity behind this. Like it's just like put from machine to paper. It's like if AI made a comic book movie. Like just my God.
Yeah, it's bad. It's not connecting with anyone. $11 million is, I mean, you have indies that make more than that on opening weekend. So yeah, it's real bad. And I mean, I've seen the marketing everywhere. We've had to sit through the trailer so much, especially because it got delayed. It was supposed to come out in October. So man, yeah, it's bad.
Yeah, it's not great. Seeing as this is likely the last of these Sony Spider villain movies we get for a minute, Andy, any words of advice for Sony if they were listening right now after having seen all of these joints? Like, what do they do next? Take a break, I'd say, and then come back with Spider-Man in these movies? Is that the advice?
I mean, look at what James Gunn is doing. He's committing to the bit. He's committing to the character, the style, the tone, all of that. And instead, we've been getting movie by committee. At things that are pieced together, the ADR stuff, like this and Madam Web, just total messes, bad scripts, and the stars can't do all the heavy lifting. You got to have a movie that people are excited to see.
Yeah, like I think you need stuff that's better written. I think you need stuff that's just a little bit. You need to build a universe instead of trying to like thoughtfully place characters inside of one. You need to create one for us and create a place that people want to go, right? Like you got to create that escape. Like Kraven the Hunter ain't it, man. I don't want to be in Kraven the Hunter. I'd rather be anywhere else. Andy, would you recommend Kraven the Hunter?
Absolutely not. The hardest of passes. It's way too long. It's very boring. It's a total mess. The performances are bad. The story's nonsensical. The CGI is fine. The action is okay, but it's just punctuated between huge stretches of talking in rooms, and it's just so unbelievably boring. Goes nowhere. Not even worth watching the highlights on YouTube in 6 months. So hard pass.
Yeah, big skip. Best way to watch this movie is in short clips on TikTok. Like anything worth seeing will be posted there, I think. Goofy Russell Crowe or like some dumb thing Aaron Taylor Johnson does. Otherwise pass. Like there's nothing here, man. It's nothing here. It's not worth it. It's a bummer. It's a bummer for J.C. Chandor. It's a bummer for Aaron Taylor Johnson. I think there's a lot of talent in this movie. I just don't think it was put together by people who, I don't know, had any sort of like cohesive vision for it. It's a bummer. I think performances are adamant where possible. I think people understand that they're getting a paycheck. It's Kraven the Hunter. Anyway, we should move on to something bigger, something more exciting, all right? And I wish I had bigger visuals for this. I do, but I don't. It's pretty Spartan this year. However, our opinions are authentic, and I'm really pleased with what we've come up with. Every year we have a funny way of introducing this. It never quite goes the same. This year, I'm sure, will be different too. 2024 is a new year, so that means new list. Andy, what are we talking about here?
We're talking about our top 10 films of the year of 2024.